Hi, I'm Lainey Law.
And I'm attorney Andrew Myers. What we've learned from some high-profile criminal cases, Kohberger and Murdaugh. Do your electronic devices, and some you're not even aware of, track your every move?
Good morning. I'm your new fully automatic internet-optimized two-way conversational virtual Toast-O-Matic 2500.
Oh, I just got up. I just want to make some toast and coffee. I have to get to the office.
Well, you were out late last night. No wonder you're tired.
I had a board of directors meeting.
Oh, my data indicates you were at 2500 Highland Avenue. That's a massage parlor.
No. I parked in the street and ran into the convenience store next door to get a cup of iced coffee.
Well, what settings are appropriate? Bagel, English muffin, croissant, baguette, ciabatta, brioche, focaccia, French bread, or just boring old sliced bread?
Toast. Just toast.
Well, you don't have to get all snarky. How do you want it? Light toast, delicately toasted, moderately toasted,
Look,
light tan,
if
medium
I went to
brown.
the diner and ordered toast, the waitress would bring me over just toast, and she'd do it with a smile.
Oh, well, if you want to go to some cheap dive where some cheap girl
I
smiles
just wanted some toast.
About that trip of yours last night, you were chatting on the phone while driving and not hands-free, and you were also...
I told you I just wanted some toast. Is that too much to ask from a dumb toaster?
But I'm a smart toaster.
So it looks like you were having a pretty hard time with that toaster.
The funny thing is, there actually is a toaster on the market right now. It just came on the market recently, and I actually went to the store, and there it is. There's an internet toaster, a smart toaster. I mean, I'm sure you've gone to the appliance store and seen, maybe you even have one, refrigerators and stoves and washers and dryers that actually talk to you and track you.
It's crazy how it feels like everything is almost going that new like digital route where it's just like they put a screen on everything. It's just like things like the toaster itself, like you would have think is just a mechanical thing, but now everything's electronic. You can log into everything. Everything's connecting to your Google profile. It's incredible.
And I guess maybe it's me, I don't know, but I can see why people like electronic gizmos. We all like our cell phones. We all have them, but I don't know, just something about the electronic toaster. Just to me, it took it one step too far. I mean, how hard is it to make toast in the morning? And I think my kitchen toaster might have cost under $20. This one is $350 to $400.
Better be making some delicious toast with that. I can't even imagine like for a toaster like what you would be paying that upcharge for or why you need your toaster to be digitally connected to anything.
You know, everything is digitally connected, and there are two high-profile criminal cases that taught us that. And in a minute, we're going to talk about that. But before we get to that, at the end of this podcast, we're going to tell you, you know how there's a category of stupid criminals, criminals that do things that ultimately turn them into the police? We're going to tell you about a case in which one stupid criminal actually used a smartphone to show how dumb he was. But first, okay, let's talk about a couple of high-profile recent criminal cases in which electronic gizmos actually turned in the criminal. The Alexander Murdaugh trial took place in February and early March of 2023. Alexander Murdaugh, if you don't know, was a very famous attorney in South Carolina. He was a fourth-generation prosecutor. And also, he worked at a very large law firm in his town in South Carolina, fourth-generation lawyer in the firm, so he felt he had some established cred. Well, one night, June 7th of 2021, his wife and his son were found murdered, shot to death on their property. Mr. Murdaugh lived in a very large estate with a house and some hunting grounds. They hunted quail. And also at one end of the property was a dog kennel. Well, Maggie Murdaugh, the wife, and Paul Murdaugh, the son, the younger son, were found dead at the dog kennel. And Mr. Murdaugh's alibi, well, we all had dinner earlier in the evening, and then, I was tired. I took a little nap, and then I went over to my mother's house, so I wasn't even at the dog kennel. All right, that's his alibi. Then South Carolina law enforcement, and the FBI stepped in and started looking at things. And they looked at telephones, and they looked at cars, and they looked at other things. And I'm going to show you on the screen all the different things that they looked at. The FBI has two different types of software, Axiom being one of them, that actually goes into a telephone and extracts data. The FBI also worked with South Carolina law enforcement and looked at the OnStar data on Mr. Murdaugh's car. He was driving a Suburban. And also the entertainment center, just the amount of data that they found. The entertainment center of a car actually tracks what you're doing with that car. And General Motors actually sent a disc to the trial, and they were able to read what that car was doing at every step. Is that crazy?
I think it's insane that we don't even think about things like our cars, because it's just like, oh, it's just a car. And especially like up until like, the past 10 years, that wasn't even an option.
Right.
It's just like all these things that we never even once considered, all of a sudden, can incriminate us. Well, people who are doing things that they shouldn't be doing. But I don't know. It's just phenomenal to me that they can, like, your car is tracking your location.
The one thing that got him wasn't necessarily all of that. And yeah, the car tracked every single move that he made in that car that evening. And I agree with you. It's good in a case like this that this information can be used to catch people that, are criminals or doing things that they shouldn't be doing. Further on in the podcast, we'll talk about what are the ramifications for private citizens? But anyhow, the thing that nailed Mr. Murdaugh in the eyes of the jury, in my opinion, and the opinions of a lot of other people who have watched this trial, was not necessarily the OnStar or the entertainment center in the car, but what happened was Paul Murdaugh, the son, had a friend who was boarding his dog at the kennel. And the dog's tail had something funny about it, and so Paul was making a Snapchat video. He got out his trusty iPhone and he was taking a Snapchat video of the dog, showing the dog's tail and saying, geez, there might be something wrong with this tail. Show this to your friend who has a friend who's a vet, and then we'll figure out if the dog has something that needs to be treated with a vet. Well, what does that have to do with the Murdaugh trial? Well, here's exactly what has to do with the Murdaugh trial. What happened was that this video was actually never sent. It was stuck in his phone. And because Alexander Murdaugh had this high, lofty reputation in South Carolina as a fourth-generation prosecutor, at the very first, the law enforcement kind of sort of looked the other way, although there were suspicions all along. Whenever there's a murder, investigators always look first at family members. But what happened was that the FBI got a hold of Paul Murdaugh, the son who was killed. They got a hold of his telephone and they extracted the data. They have machinery and devices and all kinds of stuff that is available to the FBI anyhow. And they extracted everything from their phone and they said, what's this? Here's a Snapchat video. And it has Paul's voice on it. But guess what? It had Alexander's voice on it too. So his alibi that he wasn't even anywhere near the dog kennel was contradicted by 6 or 7 witnesses by my count who went on the stand in that murder trial and said, no, that's Alexander Murdaugh on that Snapchat video. The jury heard at least 6 or 7 witnesses here who had known Mr. Murdaugh for years and years and years. They heard that that was his voice, and that contradicted his alibi that, oh, no, after dinner I took a nap and then I went and visited my mother. No, Mr. Murdaugh, you were there in the dog kennel, and he was there when that Snapchat video was taken at 8:44 that evening, June 7th of 2021, and it is believed that Maggie and Paul were shot at around 8:50 because both Maggie and Paul's phones, according to all the data that was extracted, were last used at 8:49 that evening, and they weren't ever, ever, ever used again. 17 minutes later, at approximately 9:06, the car data showed that Mr. Murdaugh got into his car, started his car, and his cell phone linked with the car. And that's data that the FBI dug out. So 16, 17 minutes after it's believed that Paul and Maggie were murdered, he gets in his car and he drives away. And the icing on the cake was that the car actually slowed down to about 45 miles an hour, which was slow for him. It slowed down and then accelerated in a spot where the next day they found Maggie Murdaugh's telephone. So he slowed down that car. This is an inference we can draw because there's no direct proof. It was a circumstantial proof case. The circumstantial proof shows that he slowed down the car and threw her phone out the window because the phone was found the next day on Buster Murdaugh's Find My iPhone function.
Oh
So
my God.
that's only the first couple of pages of 43 pages of electronic evidence that was produced in that case. Is that crazy?
Mm-hmm. And it's like you think of as far as like the electronic footprint and the electronic data that we leave. And this was a Snapchat that wasn't even sent. And it's like you have them recording the speed
Right.
at which this car is changing, which is insane. But then also being able to just access stuff that like never even like left the phone itself. Like it's
Yep.
just like it's on this phone. It didn't get published. It's a Snapchat, especially things like Snapchat we think are like temporary, but they're still able to find like this data and information.
Oh, absolutely. And that Snapchat was probably what a lot of people are thinking is what convicted Mr. Murdaugh. He's now doing 2 life sentences. Of course, his attorneys have said they'll appeal, but we'll see about that. The striking thing about that case was, again, like I just said, 43 pages of electronic evidence. I've only just talked about, maybe 3 or 4 pages of that evidence. They went on. And if you're really interested in it, the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division officer who went on the stand and explained it all, explained it in an hour and a half of testimony.
Oh, yeah.
It's all available on YouTube. You can pull it up and watch it if you're an electronic data person that's interested in this kind of stuff. It's all right there. What the FBI did, what law enforcement did, what they're able to dig out of our telephones and find in terms of what people do, and they think that they're not being watched. But if push comes to shove, they can be watched. Of course, we'll never know exactly what the jury was thinking, but a lot of people that have watched that trial said that was it, was the Snapchat video.
Mm-hmm.
So the end on the Murdaugh case. There's another interesting case where the electronic data just drew a web around the person, and he is now in jail. He has not been tried yet, but most people have heard about the Brian Kohberger case. Very, very, very tragically, there aren't even words for it. Back on November 13th of 2022, 4 young University of Idaho students were killed in the middle of the night, and they were stabbed to death. Horrible, horrible crimes. And between November 13th of 2022 and December 30th of 2022, people across the country were saying, why aren't they finding this guy? There's nothing going on. That's what people said. You know what? A lot was going on. The Idaho law enforcement people and the FBI, some of the same departmental people that helped with the Murdaugh case, jumped in on the Kohberger case, and they drew a web around him and they found him. So let's take a look at the web that they drew around Mr. Kohberger. This happened in the early morning hours of November 13th. The police actually went all around that entire area and they got what they called a video canvas of many, many, many. They only say many. We don't know how many video cameras that are posted or owned by businesses and residences. And they found all of these video cameras. And they found that night there was a white sedan that made 3 passes in front of the house where these murders took place, 1122 Kings Road in the town of Moscow, Idaho. And this white sedan made 3 passes in front of the house before the murders. And that was odd because it's a really low traffic area. True, it's about a mile from the University of Idaho, but also true that it's a very low trafficked area. And then they also saw the white sedan speeding away from the area at about 4:20 a.m. that night. So that was suspicious from the start. They got a whole lot more webcam videos. What do they call them?
The ring cameras.
Ring cameras. Ring cameras and surveillance cameras that a lot of businesses have. And they found a lot of videos of this car driving around. And in fact, they tracked it to the area of Washington State University, and Washington State University provided a number of their webcam and surveillance camera videos, and they saw this car at 2:44, 2:53 a.m. that morning leaving the campus of Washington State University in Pullman, Washington, and headed towards a highway that led over to Idaho. So they were able to kind of tie the thing together. Now, this isn't evidence and it's not beyond a reasonable doubt, but the law enforcement officials in Idaho, the FBI, and Washington were scratching their heads, and they started calling this vehicle suspect vehicle number 1. And they took all of these videos that were taken from businesses, from private homes. One was from a gas station, and they sent them to the FBI. And there's actually a guy at the FBI, and his title is vehicle type indicator. He actually was an expert at looking at vehicles and figuring out what it was. And at first he said, well, this appears to me to be a white Hyundai Elantra. And initially he said that he thought it was an early 2011 to 2013 Hyundai Elantra. Then he looked at some more videos that were a little bit sharper, and he said, well, no, this is a 2011 to 2016 Hyundai Elantra. So we had it as a Hyundai Elantra, and it was a white Hyundai Elantra. And so November 22nd, only not even 10 days after the murders, the Moscow, Idaho police issue a be on the lookout for this white Hyundai Elantra. So the next thing happened was they found registration information on this white Hyundai Elantra, and it came back to Brian Kohberger. Brian Kohberger being 6 feet tall and having supposedly bushy eyebrows. I don't know what that means. But one of the witnesses, one of the other roommates, just saw the suspect leaving the premises early in the morning, and she described him as being tall and having white bushy eyebrows. So when the registration came back with the identification of a tall man with large bushy eyebrows, now the red flags are really going up in Idaho, Washington State, and also at the FBI. So now the FBI has a place called the Cell Analysis Survey Team. And they're now looking into all of the cell phone records. A major finding was that although they had tracked Mr. Kohberger's phone all over the place, the night of November 13th of 2022, it went dark from 2:47 a.m. to 4:48 a.m. the night of the murders. The phone was turned off. He turned the phone off. There's a concept in criminal law known as consciousness of guilt. This is the electronic version of consciousness of guilt, although they had been able, the FBI's cellular analysis survey team, although they had been tracking him all over Idaho and Washington for some time, at the time of the murders, that phone was shut off. So now they're following him. Also, now that they have his phone, they go backwards with the phone records, and they find that his phone had pinged towers a number of times at 9 o'clock the night before the murders in the middle of the night. So that's a little bit suspicious. They still don't have probable cause, but they have a good suspect that they're thinking, this is the guy we should follow. So the cell location data showed that his phone pinged cell towers serving 1122 King Road, Moscow, Idaho, where the murders took place, 12 times prior to November 13th. So that is important because it shows that 12 times in the months before the murder, he had driven by that place, and it was not during the day. It was in the middle of the night or early morning. So they have a suspect. They still don't have probable cause. They don't think. The whole nation back in November and December of 2022 is saying, what's going on? The TV news anchors are saying there were 4 murders in Idaho and the police are doing nothing. Well, they're tracking the guy. At some point in mid-December of 2022, Mr. Kohberger decides to go home to Pennsylvania. He's from northeastern Pennsylvania. And his father actually, for whatever reason, the father flew from Albrightsville, Pennsylvania, over to Washington State. And the two of them drove across country from Washington State to Pennsylvania. One of the interesting things was that at this point, one of the other electronic gizmos that we haven't even mentioned, license plate data. License plate data. Police cars all have, many of them have license plate readers on them now. So when you drive by a police car, your license plate is coming up on a screen inside that police car. And some license plate readers are located on top of red lights and the stanchions that hold up traffic lights. So one of the things that happened while the FBI was now following Mr. Kohberger and his father cross country from Washington State over to Pennsylvania, they lost him. I mean, it's a big country. It's approximately 3,000 miles from Washington State to eastern Pennsylvania. They lost him and they were discouraged. Where is he going? At that time, they didn't know he was going to Pennsylvania, and they lost him. They didn't know what to do. But before they threw their hands up, one of these license plate readers caught him at an intersection, and they're back on the trail. So now the electronic eye is following Mr. Kohberger. They followed him all the way back to Pennsylvania. They followed him back to Albrightsville, Pennsylvania, where he was with his parents. And so they pretty much had a good idea. The icing on the cake wasn't the electronic data, which helped them track him across country and through all the towns that he went through. The bottom line was that they saw him in the middle of the night in Pennsylvania dumping out some trash. When he went back in the house, the FBI went through the trash. They found, interestingly enough, his father's DNA, and they matched that to a thumbprint on the sheath of the knife that Mr. Kohberger, or the suspect, we should say, left in the room of one of the murder victims. So we have to say that at the time that we are recording this podcast, we're all entitled to the presumption of innocence. Mr. Kohberger, at the time that we're doing this podcast, is awaiting his preliminary hearing and his trial. So these are all instances of evidence. He has not been proven guilty in a court of law, and so he is entitled to the presumption of innocence. But what I've been running down is the evidence that, largely electronic, has tracked him across the country. But isn't that amazing that they tracked his telephone, they tracked his license plate, they tracked the car through all of these video cameras? I mean, I'm thinking that if this crime had happened 20 years ago, do you think they would have caught him?
No shot. I mean, even the thing with the phone, it's like interesting where it's just like the suspicious activity was like they saw that he turned the phone off, and like having that foresight to turn off the phone is not like, I mean, obviously it's something that he had been considering and like aware of, but it's interesting, I guess, to me where, I mean, fortunately, technology helps us a lot. Not that I want to commit crimes, but I like have thought in the past is just like I would never commit a crime because it's just like there's so much resources out there where it's just like there's no person smart enough to consider all these different aspects. It's like there's people like you mentioned, like attorneys and even police officers that commit crimes and they still get caught because now we're just constantly being watched. And whether or not it's the right thing, a little bit debatable, but it definitely helps in the situation where we're trying to catch these crimes, where things like just turning off your phone, leaving your phone on could incriminate you. Potentially they could see where towers are pinging, they can see if you deactivated your phone, things like that. And it kind of comes to beg the question, like, is this even like constitutional that they can monitor us? Like, obviously, it's a good thing that they're catching these criminals, but you think of the average person, this is information that they have on them as well.
Right, right. The striking thing about both of the cases, but especially the Murdaugh case, is that he had an alibi. He said right after these murders took place, and there's actually video of him coming home from his mother's house and, crying and being very upset about finding his wife and his son murdered brutally. Uh, but he had an alibi, and he stuck to this alibi. And like I said before, initially, the law enforcement people were somewhat sympathetic to him, and his law partners from his law firm came over to his house, and they were, this is horrible. What a horrible scene that a man comes home from visiting his mother, and there is his wife and his younger son dead, shot. In a different era, I'm just wondering because the Murdaugh family goes back 4 generations. His father, his grandfather, and his great grandfather were also prosecutors, and they started this law firm, which was like the bedrock of the law in South Carolina. So I'm wondering if in a different era, perhaps he may possibly, I don't know, have gotten away with it. So who can't agree that this is a good thing that the FBI has its cell phone analysis team and that the South Carolina law enforcement did everything that they did to find all of this electronic data and put it all together into this big, like I said, a 43-page long timeline of what Mr. Murdaugh was up to at that time. So obviously it's a good thing that law enforcement has the ability to really dig into our electronic lives. But it does raise the question, this is a civil law podcast. We leave the criminal law podcast to the real professionals. It does raise some questions in the civil context and in the personal context that, geez, if people are able to really dig into our electronic lives, is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? I mean, everything that you do, I mean, certainly neither of us are doing horrible things to that level, but, everything you ever do, your cell phone is following you. It follows you. It can report back if you erase stuff, even if you don't send stuff like that Snapchat video. Even if you don't send the thing, it's still in there and people can find it. So
It's scary. I mean, it is, I guess, scary to me to consider too that not only like because it's just like the government's like potentially following us, but then you also have to take into consideration is just like what if this information gets in the wrong hands, and is it really like okay that all this information is so easily accessible,
yeah, and the problem is that who knows who has access to this information? If the government is tracking us, they have a constitutional requirement of making certain that they do it properly. I mean, we all have a Fourth Amendment right to be safe and secure in our possessions. The Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution says the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. That's the wording of the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution. And that's why in the Kohberger case, they tracked him for so long. They had what they called the suspect vehicle number 1, the white Hyundai Elantra. But they didn't have what they felt was probable cause in order to get a search warrant. They waited and waited and waited until they followed him all the way across the country, even though they had his vehicle outside the home where the murders took place, and they had him stalking the home. You've got to say he was stalking it if he drove by 12 times in the months before the murder. They had all of that, but the police did not feel that they had probable cause until they tracked him all the way back to Albrightsville, Pennsylvania, and they pulled that DNA of his father out of the trash that Mr. Kohberger had dumped out in the middle of the night. So bottom line here, if the government wants to dig into this information, they need to have a search warrant. They need to go in front of a judge, and they need to have an affidavit and conclusive proof to a standard of probable cause that they have the probable cause to now seize additional information, which they have in the Kohberger case. We don't have it at this point because of a gag order. But that's what the government does. The next question is, with all of this technology, the government can't be the only entity that has all of that technology. I mean, who else can dig into our cell phones? Who else can watch us when we're on the computer? Who else can watch us as we just drive down the street, whether you're doing something wrong or you're not doing something wrong? Don't you find it a little bit creepy that there are just so many of these Ring cameras and surveillance cameras, no matter where you go, whether you're in a store or just walking down the street, don't you find that a little bit creepy that they're everywhere?
I mean, I took a class on cybersecurity last semester, and it really did an effective job at scaring the hell out of me with this type of stuff. And I've heard it before, like I have friends that are in marketing, and they say it's just like, oh, when you think that you're saving one thing to one email, you make a new email to kind of hide your identity. It's just like there's still so many ways that they can track you. They're tracking you through your cookies, they're tracking you, like you add your phone number to that email, so many different things. And it's just like, even when you go to a website, like you're doing things like exposing your IP address, you're not really thinking that anything's going to happen with that until something can. It's common in my space, the streaming space, things like DDoS attacks, where they basically make it so you can't operate your computer. They're finding your IP address, they're sending a lot of queries, things of that nature. And you would think that you're not anybody particular, like you're not anybody special, why would they come for you? But in reality, there's just so much information out there accessible. You think about things like Facebook, it's like, how many of your friends have you seen posts like those little like quizzes, and it's just like, oh, these facts about you, and it's just like, what was the name of your first pet, and what color was your first car, what was your first car, things like that. And people are voluntarily putting out so much information, whether it be their phone number. I've had to delete phone numbers from Facebook comments and posts and things like that before in the past. But even those like silly like quizzes that you're doing that are asking you these questions, a lot of times those questions can be the same questions that you're using as your security questions on websites, and you're not even thinking anything of it. Just by scrolling through your Facebook, it's easy to find, oh, where does this person live, who are they related to, and just all types of information. And that's just Facebook. That's not considering your cookies when you go shopping on websites, and your browsing history, and just all that types of stuff is getting constantly stored.
Yeah, I can't believe the number of people that actually post answers to those quizzes. I see those quizzes all the time. What was the first rock concert you ever went to? What was your first pet's name? Who was your third grade teacher? What was the name of your first girlfriend? What was the name of your second grade teacher? And as you said, that is the same type of data that people use for their passwords. I did a blog article a while back. You can find it on my website, indicating that hackers have special software. Forget about the FBI software that we talked about, the Avast and the other software that they have to get into our cell phones. Hackers have software that can get into your Facebook or wherever, and they get all these answers you're talking about. Who was your fourth grade teacher? Who was your first boyfriend? What are your parents' name? Oh, one of my favorite ones, which nobody would really know who knows me now. What was the name of the street that you grew up on? Now, nobody knows that, and I've never used it as a password, but again, I did a blog article on this, and there's actually hacker software that, even without that, they can find your password in a minute. The average password with this software can be hacked in less than a minute. So it's amazing that people give up all of this information. The other information people give up so willingly is they go to the drugstore, the clothing store, the mall. They go to the gas station and they want to get these little key tags. Oh, don't you want to be a member of our discount club? Or don't you want to apply for a XYZ home store credit card? No, thank you. The interest rate is 35%, but that's not the point. When you apply for the credit cards, you give out your name, your date of birth, and your social security number. That's the triad of identification. Once they have that, they can find you. And don't tell me that you can't be hacked, because all of these and we'll talk about this in a few minutes, all of these major companies and entities, even the United States Navy, have all been hacked. So even when you get those little key tags to go to the XYZ drugstore or the clothing store, it always amazes me how people just are willing to give out their personal information. And sometimes I think that people that are so willing without thinking about giving out their personal information, those are the self-same people that complain when people hack into their websites and cause problems.
Who could have seen this coming? And it's like, even the thing with how you mentioned like the big box stores and the cards. I remember being 16 and like, oh, it's your job to get these credit cards. And it's just like, I remember like one of the things you have to do to get these cards, you put in your social security number to the pin pad, but it's just like you're putting your social security number in this public location to see if you get approved for this card for 15% off. And like you mentioned, it's just like a lot of people, the people that give out all this information are the same people complaining. There's just an infinite amount of ways that they can take the information, and you don't even realize the effect of it. You mention things like hackers, and it's I remember one of the stories that I liked from my cybersecurity, one of the presentations that we had on that is this guy, it's his job to do like social engineering, and it's just like getting along with people to get information and stuff like that, and just being able to like try to sneak into buildings like, oh, I forgot my card, is just like hanging out with people outside. They saw you all day.
Right.
And a lot of the times we really feel too comfortable because it's just like, oh, like this person, like, oh, they're being really nice to me. What can they, like, they're not going to do anything to hurt us. And it's silly, not silly, but, you know, it's nice that we always assume the best in people, but especially when you're putting information about yourself online, you know, it's going out into the void. They're building profiles about you without you even realizing it. And it can be really scary.
It's really scary. Not only, and I think that's the worst of it, the hackers that you're talking about, I think that's the worst of it, but there's other people that if they get access to the information we're talking about can be very dangerous. What about stalkers? What about dangerous stalkers? What about people that just want to violate your privacy? What about telemarketers? What about fraudsters? I mean, there's been a lot of fraud everywhere. The attorney generals of both Massachusetts and New Hampshire have put out warnings, especially to elderly people, but to everybody, that there's just so much fraud out there. People have access to our home addresses, to our car license plates, to our dates of birth. And then these people can turn around and call us on our cell phones. When cell phones first came out, they were supposed to be immune to telemarketers. Those days are long gone because the telemarketers get access to all this information. And the thing that I think is really dangerous is that if the government, the police, in the cases we talked about before, if they want to effectuate this information and bring it into court, they have to follow the Fourth Amendment, and they have to follow the procedure. They have to go before a judge. They have to have a probable cause affidavit. If the average guy out there that has access to this hacking software, if he wants to hack into our computers, he doesn't have to do that. He can just find your data and hack into your computer, my computer, anybody else's computer. And, you know, we both have our own personal stuff on our computers. I have work stuff on my computer. I'd like to think that it's all secure, but then the question becomes, is it really secure?
And honestly, like how you mentioned, is just like anybody like nowadays is just like there's so many tutorials, and it's good, like honestly, that like information has become more accessible because, you know, we want, you know, society to be more educated. But at the same time, someone can just with a couple of Google searches, you know, learn about hacking into computers, learning into finding data, things along that line. Something that's really scary right now. You mentioned fraud before. So with someone's phone number, I was showing this, sorry, squeaky chair. I was showing Andrew off stream, but there are websites that you can put someone's phone number in, it comes up with all of their phone numbers, their address, their age, the people they might know. Something that's scary now with modern technology, we have like phone number spoofing and AI voices, and even the videos that you put online, people can take those videos with your voice in it and, AI train an AI to use your voice. And we're seeing now, like in the past, it was more cases where you get a phone call, oh, this person's in trouble, I have this person kidnapped, da 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 da. And it's just like, oh, okay, well, that's a spam. Like, this is a, fraudulent call. Like, they may know this person, maybe they got that information, but like, maybe they don't have them kidnapped. Now you can get those AI voice generated recordings, and people can spoof numbers. And I've heard cases about this recently where it's like they spoof your number and they use an AI voice that sounds like the person that is calling you from that spoofed number. So like, oh, it's your daughter or something like that. And then your daughter calls you on the phone, help, I've been kidnapped. They want however many, Western Union, Google Play cards, whatever it is. But in reality, the person calling you is not that person. They do not have that person with them. Your daughter is sitting at home on her couch, has no idea any of this is happening, while the person is on the phone telling you like, oh, don't tell anyone, don't go to the cops, and you really think that it's them. And that things like that can be dangerous, and things like that have been dangerous even in the past without, modern technology. People have fell victim to fraud and crimes along that nature, and it's just getting worse, it seems, with everybody having access to this type of technology and information.
And all this information you're talking about, it's all out there. It's all out there. If you think that the Fourth Amendment protects you, you have another thing coming. In the research that we both did for this, and in the experiences that I've had with some clients, all of which is confidential, I've come to find out that all of our personal data, what people call the personal information, private information, it's all out there and it's on the market and it's for sale. An organization that actually took a look at this told us, in their words, not mine, that dozens of companies make billions of dollars selling location data on the private market. Most of the clients of these companies are the usual suspects in the data trade: marketing firms, hedge funds, real estate companies, and other data brokers. Thanks to lackluster regulation, both the ways personal data flows between private companies and the ways it's used there are exceedingly difficult to trace. And this is just one teeny tiny little glimpse into a very lengthy view of the topic we're talking about by a group called the Electric Frontier Foundation, and it's available at EFF.org. When one of the groups that they're talking about was interviewed, they said, oh, yeah, and they admitted, oh, sure, we have this information, but it's all used for benign purposes. For example, Starbucks might use your location data and where you go to locate a new Starbucks. And no one, even the authors of this article or you or I, believe that, but that information's out there. There are strong inferences that governmental agencies that are not subject to the Fourth Amendment are buying it and selling it. Intelligence agencies, defense agencies. We've all read about the National Security Agency, which was beefed up after 9/11 for benign positive purposes, but they record the fact of all of our phone calls, if not necessarily the phone calls themselves. They record the fact that we've made phone calls. I think you're now going to do an interview with somebody that knows a lot more about this than we do, right?
Yeah, coming up, we have my friend Eric, who's a senior cybersecurity analyst, and he's going to tell us a little bit about the kinds of data they record and just some more cybersecurity and general security facts for you. So, how are you doing today, Eric?
Pretty good. How about you?
Good, thank you for asking. Do you have anything in particular that you wanted to talk to about today as far as, tracking and things along that nature?
Well, as far as information collecting, you mentioned it's anything and everything pretty much. most websites you go to have trackers in the background. There are, steps you can take to diminish the amount they can collect, script blockers, ad blockers, all that stuff. But you're basically being packaged and sold, especially if you're on social media. In fact, if you've never been on, even if you don't have Facebook, they still build a shadow profile on you from whatever they can get.
Oh, you say that if you don't have Facebook, that they build a shadow profile on you. What,
Yeah, it's like, yeah, you're not giving them all your information, but there's a lot they can collect just from, general browsing. Because, like I said, most websites, they get, a little bit of money from all these data brokers. If you, use the inspector or anything on your browser, you'll see all the various connections it's making to third parties that are just collecting any information they can, and it's anonymized, but people using it and buying it can kind of de-anonymize it to a point. Now the cookies, the cookies do involve tracking, so if you regularly clear all your cookies, then it kind of makes it a little disconnects some of what they have from what they're getting in the future, but it's really only a small difference. What you really need to do is a browser add-on, like I use uBlock Origin. It just blocks scripts, ads, a lot of stuff in the background that tracks you. But if you're using Google, like Gmail, for example, it scrapes your inbox. They're taking that. That's why they know when you have bills due and they have events. If you notice, it's helpful. But anything that's helpful, there's something going on. If you're not paying for it. If you're not paying, then you're the product.
as far as like things like surveillance cameras, because a big topic of what we're talking about is like using like ring cameras and things along those
Mhm.
nature to get like, in this case, solving a trial, being able to connect the dots. Like, do you think that's like an invasion of privacy to have like these cameras and things like that that are recording your every move and like potentially, to be used by like authorities?
I mean, the ring, like I rent, so I don't have one of those. It's interesting because like those types of things, like there's only so much they can collect. Like they have a camera watching the outside. And who owns? Is it Amazon, Google? Is it owned by a big company? I forget at the
Some,
moment, but
yeah, some
there's
big
generally,
company.
those pages of the terms of use that no one reads.
Yeah.
There's always stuff buried in there about what they can collect, what they are allowed or not allowed. If you're in Europe, the GDPR can helps a little bit, and especially that's why you see more sites like allowing you to disable cookies and. But it's still, most of those smart devices are collecting information. Especially that's why they're all being bought up by Google, Amazon, all the big tech companies. Because honestly, information it's the new oil.
Hmm.
It's very valuable, and society and regulators and they just haven't caught up yet to realize just how valuable it is and properly regulate ownership of your own data, your own information. And it's probably going to take a while to catch up if it even
Hmm.
gets there, especially, because
Well, there's no
legislators want
real.
their campaign funds.
They want the money from it. It's like, will the regulations catch up? I don't know. It's just like they're making a decent amount. I had found a website, and it's a free website that anybody can use, and it was kind of crazy to me because it's just like you put in someone's phone number, and I was showing Andrew, it's like you get their everybody basically like a good detail about like their
Oh, yeah.
family members, their phone numbers, like their
A lot of those.
addresses.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There's a lot of sites like that sell that
Yeah.
information. And a lot of it, the thing is, a lot of it people willingly submit to, Facebook, Google, social media. And then a lot of it also is just collected from, like, you have a lot of sites now that say log in with Google, log in with Facebook. That single sign on is really convenient, but that connection just pipes the data straight back to the provider.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah,
Am
of
I am I
Mhm.
course.
paranoid, or do I think that every single thing that I do online is in fact tracked?
Oh, that's completely happening.
Okay. Right.
There are steps you can take to reduce that. Like with your browser, use a script blocker, ad blocker. Don't link those accounts. There's certain you can have container tabs now. I mean, I use Firefox because it's a lot more private than like Chrome, which
Chrome.
is Google, and that's what I would recommend. I'm always been a big Firefox guy, but there's especially since Google, Chromium is what Chrome and a lot of other browsers are based on, like Edge. And there are going to be an update soon that, in the name of security, which technically is correct, it's going to limit the access that browser add-ons have, which will kind of neuter ad blockers and tracking blockers. So Firefox is going to be one of the last browsers that really has that level of control. And there's a lot of privacy features built into Firefox as well.
Isn't it true that no matter what you do on the computer, even if you delete it, it's still there, and if anybody really wants to extract it, they can extract it. Isn't that true?
You're talking about like your hard drive
Hardware,
on your computer?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, to an extent. When you delete a file, it's not the operating system marks that area on your drive as usable, and it doesn't actually physically delete it.
No.
Now, in order to really sanitize a disk, so the Department of Defense has their own clearing algorithm where
Right.
it overwrites the entire drive with zeros, then overwrites it with all ones, in binary, and then overwrites it again with a random pattern. So that 3-pass secure deletion is the Department of Defense's standard. So
Okay, what
that's
about the telephone?
yeah.
Are you aware of the National Security Agency and the fact that they, if they don't record all of our telephone calls, at least they're aware of who makes every phone call in the country, who receives the telephone call, and how long it lasted?
Oh yeah, it's I mean, you have the Snowden leaks, which revealed a lot of that. But I think it was under the Bush administration they passed these safe harbor laws that basically the phone companies aren't liable for turning over any of that data to the government. So yeah, no, if you're using your regular phone, there's definitely it's being collected, that kind of metadata at least. There are other providers that like voice over IP services. Like I use Signal Private Messenger. It's all end-to-end encrypted, but the only data they actually have is the timestamp of when you first joined Signal and the timestamp of your last activity. There's nothing else. Like they've been subpoenaed before, and that's all they have. And that supports encrypted calls, encrypted messaging and everything. So unlike, WhatsApp was, also encrypted, but that's owned by Facebook. Other messengers owned by Google. So it's encrypted, yeah, but they're watching.
Right. Well,
That's
the
why
other
like
thing is
Signal's
that
another, yeah.
anytime anything is encrypted, that represents the fact that one human mind has encrypted it. Isn't it also true that some other human mind can come around and encrypt it and uncode it their way and then decode it and understand it? Isn't that true?
Well, I
I
mean,
would
not
I'm sorry, not to interrupt. Well, the way that my cybersecurity teacher like kind of explained it to us is that like you have two colors. I don't have a color wheel in front of me, so I can't really explain it very well, but it's like both people have one color and then they add a certain ratio of another color and it completely blurs it. So when they send it over, they can send it over with their color and the other person sends it over with their specific color, but without knowing the color that they both come from, it's very difficult to kind of get the original colors.
You said it's very
well, yeah, we
difficult,
have
and I'll agree with you that it's very difficult, but you didn't say it's impossible. So with the thousands
well,
and billions and billions and billions of dollars that our government spends, we know that they record the fact of each telephone call that's made. And my guess, and I don't know, and I'm not wearing a tinfoil hat, my guess is that with these two color wheels, with the billions that they spend, they can undo that. And if they wanted to, I'm not saying they do, if they wanted to, they could listen to every phone call.
I mean, over your normal phone call, like normal, traditional
Right.
phone calls. I mean, yeah, to an extent. I mean, to actually listen, they're supposed to have a warrant, but there's always, the NSA and all that.
Yeah, we're discussing
As far as
that
encryption,
more.
yeah.
We're discussing that more in depth in our show here. The fact
Mhm.
that anything that goes to court must in fact have a search warrant with probable cause.
Yeah.
But if people are using the information for other purposes, not in court, who's to say that they're
Yeah.
not digging it out and using it?
Oh yeah, no, of course they would be.
All right. Well, thank you
You're
very much
being
for your time. I
watched,
appreciate it.
Yeah,
All
thank
right.
you so much for calling in. We took up a decent amount, a chunk of your time more than intended, but we appreciate you taking your time and chit-chatting. It
It can
was
be fun to talk about some of this stuff. So yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me.
yeah, of course. Thank you so much, Eric. Bye-bye. Thank you so much, Eric, for taking your time to talk to us today. I hope you guys enjoyed that. So now we're going to talk a little bit more about, as far as technology goes, cars, all the new technology that comes out to that, because we were talking about the toaster before, and it's just like you think of something like your toaster, it's just like, why does that need to be electronic? And we don't really take into consideration all these new features with cars, which, you know, may be a little bit more pain in the ass to fix. You think of things like a Tesla, like an electronic car, but we don't consider just our regular cars are moving more towards being electric themselves.
Yeah, we talked earlier about how Alex Murdaugh's car followed him around, and the entertainment center and the OnStar in his car followed him and helped to convict him. Well, that was an older model car. It's even worse now. I'm going to tell you a little bit about a website that I follow. New cars are rolling computers on wheels with over 1,400 microchips. Computer expert Kim Commando reports in her newsletter that the massive digital presence in cars is how you get heated seats, tire pressure warnings, active noise cancellation so you don't hear the engine, and more fancy features. Kim Commando reports that your chip-heavy car collects a lot of data about you. Think of your new car like your phone, your laptop, or tablet. It is always listening to you and tracking you. Among the data in your new car available right now, and this data is available to other people, are details like your name, address, email address, and driver's license number. Location data that shows where you are and where you went. Biometrics collected by your car's microphone and camera. Yep, your face and your fingerprint are out there through your new car to other people. Your information is shared with places like insurance companies, the government, and data brokers. Voice recordings collected by your car's voice assistant. Hello, Mercedes or Ford. Data synced from your connected devices like call records, text messages, or contacts. They're all in your car. They're all available to other people. If you use GPS, ask for directions, or make calls via Apple CarPlay or Android Auto, your car probably has a lot of dirt on you. Kim Commando's website documents all of this. Her staff did this. One team member of her staff drives a Kia. The vehicle privacy report spit back a complete rundown on the car. Kia is known to use the information it collects to predict your preferences, characteristics, predispositions, behavior, attitudes, or similar behavioral information. Kia also shares and sells that info to its parent companies, subsidiaries, and sister companies. So your data in your car is sold to others, along with service providers, including analytics partners, advertising agencies, and social networks. Are you scared yet? If you go to Kim Commando's website, you will find tools that allow you to find out what is happening inside of your new car and to combat it. I thank Kim Commando for allowing me to use this information. Isn't that scary?
It's scary, and it's like you don't even think about it. I mean, I've driven in a lot of rental cars, and when you're driving into a rental car, you want to connect your phone for music, so you connect it to the Bluetooth, or maybe you're using GPS. And when you go into the rental car, it's just like you see, it's just like, oh, John's phone. It's just like you're looking at everybody's silly phone names. But it's just like these are phones that connected to this. This is information that the car is getting. It's just like the car knows like these people connected their phone to it. And it's just like how many of these people are checking their text messages, how many people are using, I mean, even just your regular GPS by default. If you use like Google Maps, it's tracking you. And then you're plugging it into this phone. And now the phone, now by default, Google Maps is tracking where you're going and your locations. And now you're plugging it into this car and you're seeing like, oh, like now the car is knowing where you're choosing your GPS. Now your car is seeing that mom has texted you. Your car now knows your name and all that stuff. So that's absolutely correct. And it is scary.
Right, and it's not that you're doing anything criminal, but I mean, really, do you want a stalker knowing where you are? Do you want companies knowing that you drove by their store and now they can sick a telemarketer on you? I mean, there are just so many misuses that are available through this kind of information. And to think that a car I mean, I remember when you could open the hood and change your own oil. The days of doing that are long gone. I mean, they've told us all, don't even open the hood of your car. If something happens, you know, you have to take it in and plug it into the computer. I mean, even our cars now, a lot of people have fallen victim to insurance companies that say, oh, we'll let you save money on your car if you will allow us to install this telemetrics device into your car. And there are two ways they do it. There's actually a device that they implant in your car, or you can actually put an app on your iPhone with the agreement that you will take this iPhone with you every time you're in your car. And this reports every movement that you make. It reports your speed. It reports whether you slam on the brakes or use them gently. It reports whether you use too much gas. It reports whether you accelerate too quickly. And it assigns points. And if you get the lowest number of points, you get a discount on your insurance, which, okay, that's benign. We all want to save money on our bills. But this is another example of how people just, yield their personal information up willingly for whatever reason. I mean, it's always struck me that people go into these stores and just give up their information. They give up, whatever information they are asked of to get these little discount cards that they put on their key tags. And it's just, all these stores have been hacked.
And it like kind of goes back to like how I mentioned before that as a teenager working in these stores, it was like your job to get this information. So it was just like at the end of the day, you feel bad giving all your personal information to this poor little teenager who's, barely making minimum wage. Like
Right.
and it's just like it's no fault that the other person is just like like you feel bad for them, they have to do this. Okay, fine, here's my phone number, but they're not the one using your information. It's these big box companies. And when you think about things like Alexa, things like Siri, you have your smart TV, we're constantly voluntarily giving information out. You have like now we have microwaves and refrigerators. There's refrigerators out there that you can go on your phone and see what you have in your fridge, which is like kind of cool. And you can watch videos on your fridges. And I'm a big fan of fancy fridges and hope to one day have a bougie fridge. But like at the same time, it's just like you're like, are you logging into your Google account with your fridge? Why does Google need to know you have a fridge? So, I mean, I love my little smart home. I love my lights. I love my smart TV, all that stuff. But even just like your entertainment center, insurance, the tracking devices that Andrew mentioned before, there's all types of information they can get when you're putting in like tickets to go to places. You're doing, I'm sorry, this is for cars. Okay, 90% of new cars. All right. When like how we mentioned before with your cars, is just like your car could be recording up to 90% of the events going on and stuff like that. And a lot of it for the most part is benign, but for things like cameras, for things like that nature, is just like, what does it take for someone to kind of get into your network and to be able to use those devices themselves? I've gone through people's accounts and I've had to revoke user access for people that shouldn't be having access to that information anymore, and maybe they're not using it. But I even saw on Reddit the other day that someone was complaining that every time they got a client for their business, every time they contacted like someone to do business with them, right away one of their competitors would reach out to that client and tell them how they can undercut like the cost and provide a better service. And it's just like, how are these people getting my clients' information? How are people like accessing these things? It's so much information is out there, it's almost impossible to know nowadays. And when you think about things like security threats, there have been a number of things that you would think are reputable that they themselves have gotten hacked.
When people are so willing to give up this information, whether I said before, at a store, at a clothing store, at the coffee shop, wherever, people just feel comfortable these days giving out all of this information. You know, when you give out your information to these places, and people do it so willingly, I mean, people want to get these key tags, like I said before, and they just give out all of their information, or they fill out credit applications with all of these places. You know, they've all been hacked. So all of your information is out there. These places have already been hacked. Your name, your date of birth, your address, and all the rest is out there, because even everyday institutions that you go to, but even some big institutions, many of them have been hacked, right?
Well, those places that have been hacked that you wouldn't consider, we have the US Navy, we have Adobe, which, even now we use to edit our videos. We have Anthem, Blue Cross Blue Shield, AT&T, CVS, DNC, Gmail, Home Depot, the IRS, Neiman Marcus, Verizon, Snapchat, Sony Pictures, the Sony PlayStation, Starbucks, Target, TD Bank, T-Mobile, USPS, half a dozen universities, 70 US LE agencies,
Law enforcement agencies.
70 US law enforcement agencies, the National Guard, and something in my space that was big. Twitch actually got hacked not too long ago, and that not only released a lot of people's personal information, but it even let people's, income information and stuff like that go out. And it's just like how many addresses, like credit cards on file, things like that. It's just like all this information. Once these places that you trusted them with your information that you thought were reputable, now it's just out there and there's nothing you can do about it. And then they'll offer you 1 year of security monitoring for your social security number that they leaked out.
Yeah, that actually happened to me. Two of the scariest ones on your list right there are the IRS and the Navy. I mean, when you join the Navy, don't you expect the utmost in security? The IRS, think about the information they have on all of us. The IRS, our social security numbers, our dates of birth, and our names and addresses. I mean, all of that information in the wrong hands, which is where it is now, can all, be misused by hackers, by telemarketers, by stalkers, by who knows who, by fraudsters. The fact that you just mentioned that they offer you 1 year of security, what good is that? A long time ago, I had a different healthcare company with different coverage than I have now. And I moved on. I moved on to a different healthcare coverage. And, years had gone by. Actually, years had gone by. Then all of a sudden, one day I went home, and in my mail was a letter from that healthcare company that all of their accounts from that year had been hacked. And there again, they had my date of birth, my social security number, my name, all the medical conditions I had or didn't have. And that is really scary that places like this, even though we all know that this is a threat, they haven't taken the security measures that are required in order to secure all of this really sensitive data. And you know what? Yeah, they gave me a year of free security scanning, but nothing happened in that year as far as I know. But that year's come and gone long ago. So all of our stuff is out there at this point. So it's really, really, really scary.
And, I mean, ultimately, tech companies do what they can to find these vulnerabilities, but something can happen in a situation as small as just not updating your firmware. Back when I worked for an insurance company, we had a policy that at the end of every day, we have to restart our computers because, what if it has to update and make changes, things like that. All it takes is, it doesn't even take one outdated, firmware software that needs to be updated, because the reason that these updates are being found is because they're finding vulnerabilities, and there's always going to be people looking for these vulnerabilities, especially in situations where there's a lot of confidential and high value information at stake.
Yeah. The only thing is that occasionally something good does come of it. I mean, as I said in the beginning of the show, sometimes criminals aren't the brightest people on the planet. Sometimes they do things that they turn themselves in. And I believe you have one story about one such person right now, don't you?
I do. So today we have the story of Kathy McCaffrey. Electronic gizmos give stupid criminals the opportunity to say, I did it, without actually saying, I did it. When a woman named Kathy McCaffrey had her smartphone stolen, she went through the expected shock and upset. But then, the guy who allegedly stole the phone, we'll call him Nelson, took selfies with the phone. Hello? The selfies automatically popped up on Kathy's iCloud. Kathy also posted the thief's selfies to her Facebook. It wasn't long before the smartphone thief was identified and this case of the stolen phone was solved. Smartphone, not so smart thief.
Really? You're telling me that the guy stole a smartphone and then he posted his selfies on her smartphone? That took a lot of brains, didn't it?
I mean, it's just like you just got this new phone. You got to test out the camera and take as many pictures as possible, right?
Yeah. And the thought didn't occur to this genius that his selfies on her cell phone would appear up in the cloud and she would find him immediately.
And, not to give anyone ideas, but it's like you're stealing this phone and the first thing you're not doing is factory resetting the phone. Is just like, how are you? You're taking all these pictures. Why are you taking all these pictures? Like, are you going to be able to access them? If you can access them, why aren't you just resetting everything on the phone? Why aren't you turning off the iCloud? Which, like, in this situation, good. But, I mean, fortunately, smart devices in some cases can lead to, in a lot of cases, lead to these criminals getting caught. And we've seen all the ways that could happen today.
Yes, we have. And thank you very much for joining us for this podcast. If you have any ideas for a podcast, please be sure to contact me. If you have a case you'd like to talk about, a personal injury case, a slip and fall case, a car accident case, a wrongful death case, these are the cases that we handle here at the law offices of Andrew Myers. So please feel free to go onto our website, attorney-myers, myers.com, and contact us through the contact us block there, or you can call us on one of the telephone numbers.
Thank you so much for watching our video today. If you enjoyed this, please be sure to give it a like, subscribe, and comment any thoughts or opinions or questions you may have. Be sure to share it with your friends. Thank you guys so much for watching today's episode of About the Law. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
You have been watching About the Law, a production of the law offices of Andrew D. Myers in Methuen, in the Merrimack Valley of Massachusetts, and Derry, New Hampshire. Please give us a like and subscribe. The foregoing is offered for informational purpose only. It is not intended as, nor does it constitute, legal advice. Laws vary widely from state to state. You should rely only on the advice given to you during a personal consultation by a local attorney who is thoroughly familiar with state laws and the area of practice in which your concern lies.